just wanted to say thank you guys all for coming today to our seminar. Just as a quick reminder, please turn your cell phones to vibrate or off ring. I had to do that to myself earlier, and I'm sure as the rest of us who are still dealing with the harvest and the aftermath of this vintage are going to get a lot of notifications in the next few hours. So I want to say thank you and foremost to Cara State for hosting us today, to Reed, the winemaker, and Monica, the tasting room manager, for having us. Thank you guys very much for setting this up and letting us come in. Also, thank you to Aftertech Advanced Imaging for being our video sponsor today. And we thank you to Dr. Liz Thatch and all of our other panelists. Sorry, I'm also just getting back into normal life as well as everybody else, so I have to have my notes so I can stay on point. The restrooms are located in the tasting room near the clock if anybody needs those. Also, we have 4 seminars planned for 2019. Dates will be listed on our website. We're looking at February, May, August, and November for next year, so jot that down in your calendar. We'll also have a light lunch following this panel. And and then also I would like to invite Dan Aguilar up with Mechanics Bank.
Thanks, Erica. Speaking of I'm Dan Aguilar. I'm with the Mechanics Bank, and we're delighted to be the presenting sponsor of this series of Vineyard Seminars. Speaking of next year's Vineyard Seminars, I had a conversation with Rob McMillan last night. Looks like he'll be the keynote speaker, if you will, for the first seminar at the end of February, and the topic will be keying off of his annual wine industry conditions report. He'll be presenting that to all of you. So we think it'll be a great program, and we think it'll be well received, and we'll have a good turnout. And a special welcome to those of you who are business associate members. If you would like to, we'd like you to become sponsors of an event that we can craft for you next year. So if you're interested in that, please talk to Cheryl Quist, and she can work with you to put together a program that will suit your needs. So today we are honored to have Professor Liz Tosh, who almost needs no introduction these days. Well-known professor of marketing at Sonoma State's Wine Business Program. And I just learned today that she is the first woman who earned and won the Master of Wine designation here in California some time ago. So that's quite an achievement. Congratulations. And she is also a resident of the Petaluma Gap AVA. So who could be more perfect to moderate this panel but Dr. Liz Tosh?
Thanks, Karen. Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with this esteemed panel. And Dan is right. I live in the Petaluma Gap. I live right next to Gap's Crown, and I have a little tiny hobby vineyard of 120 vines, all Pinot Noir. I try to make a little wine every once in a while on a hobby basis. But I've also been a member of the Petaluma Gap Alliance now for, almost 10 years. I served on the board, and I became a lifetime member a while ago. So this place is near and dear to my heart, and I'm just so excited about all of the growth and the publicity that we've received since the AVA was achieved. So it is my pleasure then to introduce our panel and this great vintage. 2018 has been considered to be like a gift of Mother Nature, just the perfect, long, cool, growing season. Some people might think it's a little too long, right? It's been a lot of work in the vineyard and in the cellars. But what I'm going to do then is introduce the panel real quickly, and then they're going to tell you a little more about themselves as well. And we do have some prepared questions for the panel, and then we'd like to open it up to Q&A from you. So think of some good questions as we're going along. So first of all, right next to me is Evan Pantoriero, and you probably know he's the co-owner and winemaker with Fog Line, not too far from here. Next, we have Scott Welsh. He's the vineyard manager with Jackson Family Wines, and they're going to tell you a little bit about their acreage, but I think that Jackson Family Wines has some of the largest vineyard acres in the Gap. It's on our panel. And then we have Sam with Costa Brown. And Sam is the viticulturalist, and they have a pretty big stake in Gap's Crown Vineyard, so he'll probably talk a little bit about that. And then next we have Ria Daversa. She is the Farm and Ranch Director with McAvoy, and I think they have 30 acres now of vines, is that right, Ria? Yeah, great, in the Petaluma Gap. And let's see, who's next? Oh, Cameron. Yes, we have Cameron Frey. He's the VP of winemaking with Ramey. Fabulous wines coming out of there. And you probably know Dave Ramey, pretty famous here locally. And then Erica Stancliffe over here, who you already have met. She's the winemaker with Trombetta. So with that, what we're going to do is sort of go down the line for our first question and ask each of our panelists to sort of give us a sort of a high-level overview on how the 2018 vintage went for them, and if they were impacted by the 2 inches of rain we had in early October or not. And also just give us a little bit of background on where your vineyards are located and if you either purchase grapes or you farm your own. So, Evan.
Hi, everybody. So, like she said, I'm with Fogline Vineyards. I'm the owner and winemaker and, I guess, viticulturalist, too, where I represent the small grower winemaker in the Petaluma Gap. We have about 4.5 acres up above Gap's Crown on top of Presley Road. And then we have another land lease up on top of Snow Mountain Road on at about 2,200 feet, right up above where Fendler's Helgren Vineyard is. And then we also have, we purchased fruit from all over Sonoma County for our winery up on River Road in Fulton. I would say 2018 was a really great year, both quality-wise and quantity-wise. We had some issues, I think, early on. I think we're probably going to talk about bud break a little bit later, but there was some issues with sort of offset bud break, where you had sort of some catch-up that was showing up. It looked like the vines were catching up, but then you'd get to the next phase and you would see the separation between what was happening in the maturity of the vine and the fruit. But in the end, we had a lot of our fruit off before the rain, but we were impacted by the rain a little bit with some botrytis. But we managed to get through that in the Gap. The wind and the weather here seemed to help us out, and it seemed to be a really great vintage. So I'm really looking forward to what the flavors are going to be like, and I think everybody's going to be pleased.
Thanks, Evan. Yeah, my name is Scott, and my farming group is kind of on the other end of the spectrum. We're a bit on the larger side, as Liz mentioned. So I farm 330 acres just east of Petaluma off of Lakeville Highway. And then we also farm 200 acres north of Bloomfield, so around 500 acres altogether. And yeah, the rain, luckily we too had most of our Pinot off by the rain, especially with, I know most of the vineyards in the Petaluma Gap are on heavy Diablo clay soils, so it was helpful that most of our blocks and our steeper blocks had been picked already, and we weren't impacted too poorly by the rain. We're also heavy on the Pinot Noir side, and all of our Chardonnay had already been picked, although we did see a little botrytis start up this year, even before the rain. And some of the wineries, so within the Jackson Family Wines portfolio, the Petaluma Vineyard mainly supplies La Crema and the Kendall Jackson Estate Program, but then we also farm for Hartford, Siduri, Copan, so quite a number of different portfolios, and so we're picking fruit earlier for some, later for others, but overall it was a very good vintage.
Thanks, Scott. Sam Osborne from Costa Brown. I agree with Evan and Scott about the vintage. I think it was pretty incredible. We work with one vineyard in the Petaluma Gap, that's Gap's Crown, and we have about 30 acres or so of that vineyard, certain blocks scattered out throughout the vineyard. We had about 80% of it picked by the time we had that rain, and we got about an inch, a little over an inch at Gap's Crown. And we picked the remaining blocks just, I don't know, a week after. And quality-wise, we didn't see any issues with botrytis or anything in any of the blocks that we had there. So everything was really clean. Bricks, PHTA, all was pretty much the same after the rain as we had readings earlier before the rain. So it was, pretty incredible vintage. No real problems that I saw throughout the state. We have a vineyard up in Mendocino County where we had a little over 3 inches of rain, and we actually didn't have any problems up there either. So pretty fantastic. So.
Thank you. So yeah, we farm on the other spectrum of Lakeville, all the way out past the town of Petaluma. It's about a 10-minute drive on D Street, which turns into Red Hill Road. And we grow mostly Pinot Noir. But we also have some really cool esoteric varieties that we grow, which are Italian. And the last pick that we did was last week for our Montepulciano. And I did see, we picked it mostly because the olive harvest was starting, but also because it was going to, probably could have picked another week, but it was ready to go. We were worried about botrytis also. But yeah, the 2 inches of rain was great for us. It kind of just took the dust down and helped everything clean up a little bit, but our bricks and pH, all our winemakers are really happy. And on McElroy, we also buy a lot of fruit in the Petaluma Gap. So that's kind of our angle. We're hoping to develop all of our relationships within the Gap, and outside as well, but we predominantly want to focus on here. And we were really happy with the quality and quantity that we got from everybody.
Cameron Fry of Ramey Wine Cellars. Ramey Wine Cellars is located up in Healdsburg, and resource fruit as far north as Lake County, and as far south is Carneros, a lot of fruit in Russian River, as well as Napa Valley. So we're kind of all over the map. But today, yeah, what's really I'm fondly excited about is this Petaluma Gap vineyard that we've been working with since 2004 and planted in 2001. The most eastern edge of Petaluma Gap off of Highway 116, Stagecoach Road. So it's, even though it's further east, one of the most eastern sites, it's still really cold, really windy. Really expresses what I think Petaluma Gap AVA is all about. That vineyard is about 100 acres, mostly Pinot and Chardonnay. There's about 15 acres of Syrah. So I think I might be the only Syrah here today.
We grow a lot of Syrah.
You got Syrah? Yeah, okay. And we all know Syrah is a winemaker wine because nobody wants to buy it. But anyways, fun wine to make. Let's see what else. As far as the vintage goes, I kind of describe 18 as that love-hate scenario where you love this idea of perfect weather, perfect growing conditions, really dial in the perfect bricks, the TAPH that you want. And even logistically, it's like, it's probably going to be ready on this coming Sunday, but you know what? We're going to wait till Monday when everybody's back to work and fresh and ready to go. So, that's a nice thing. As opposed to like seeing this forecast of rain, which is usually the case in Petaluma Gap, right? You get this weatherman telling you there's this huge tsunami coming from Mexico, and you're like, got to pick these grapes. And so you're not we weren't forced to have to make that decision based on the weather. And then the hate part is okay. So now as a winemaker, we've had all this anxiety and stress over the expectations that we're given this pristine opportunity, these perfect grapes to make this 100-point wine. Oh, I think I'm losing 100-point wine, and so the grapes come in and you make the right decision. You think the bricks are right, the grapes are in the tank, and things are going smoothly, and every tank is full. Everything looks good this year. The color's great. The acid's perfect. The texture's good. So yeah, I got Cabernet. I've got all the Pinots pressed out, but every tank is full of grapes right now and looking fabulous. So it's game on this harvest for sure. Game on. We weren't really affected by the rains came the first week of October or so, and we picked October 17th or 18th. So yeah, there's a little more, little fuzziness on the fruit when it came in. So usually I add about 50 parts sulfur at the destemmer. This year we did 60. So, but fermentation has a cleansing sort of energy. It really cleans up a lot of the issues that come from the vineyard if they're not too extreme. Sometimes it can get out of hand. So anyway, yeah, everything is full of cherries at this point.
Thank you. So, for Trombetta family wines, I source from Gap's Crown Vineyard as well, but I do Chardonnay and Pinot Noir from that site. And I also source from numerous other vineyards around the county for Trombetta and also for Furthermore Wines, my other winery that I work for. And we have one vineyard in particular that's actually right on the cusp. It didn't quite make it into the Gap AVA, but it's right on the borderline from Stony Point and 116 area, not too far away from where we are now. And all of my Pinot was picked before the rains, and that was all, best case scenario, really happy with the quality of fruit, wasn't seeing too much botrytis out there. Of course, you're always going to get a little bit from, the far occidental reaches that I deal with, but overall, I was extremely happy with the quality on the Pinot. The color, absolutely beautiful. The aromatics, the texture, everything has been great. I was very lucky that, fermentations went seamlessly as long as I had vessels to ferment in. But with the Chardonnay, the only thing that I noticed this year, because I had 2 picks that I actually did have to kind of decide with the weather. And, being a winemaker, we are constantly looking at the weather discussion and what's the European model looking at and what's the global forecasting model looking at and trying to figure out, because for the week leading up before those rains, they were saying completely different things. And sitting there trying to go, all right, do I plan and where are the bricks and where are the flavors? I'm dealing with smaller, 2 tons here and 3 tons there, so I really get to be as nitpicky as I want. And I had 7 tons of Chardonnay sitting at Gaps and another 5 tons of Chardonnay sitting at that other vineyard right on the cusp of the Petaluma Gap. So it gets all the wind, but it's in more of a fog plane. And the only thing that I noticed with the Chardonnay this year was that, for whatever reason, it was tasting absolutely beautifully, but it was such lower bricks this year than normal. So I pulled in my Chardonnay from Gap's Crown right before the rain on Saturday morning, actually, so before it even started to sprinkle, because I wanted to make sure that the acid retained. Number one was my concern, because at 22 bricks, I had 3.3 pH already, and it tasted amazing, but I didn't want to lose any of that flavor, the concentration. I didn't want any of the water soak up and lose any of that acid. And with, Gap's Crown in particular, it has amazing acid levels, but I just wanted to make sure to retain that so that I didn't lose anything while trying to wait for sugars to bounce back or whatever it may be. Fruit came in extremely clean, but I did have the Chardonnay still hanging out on the corner of 116 and Stony Point area. So what I had the grower do, just because I was being paranoid and didn't know what was going to happen with the rain, because they say half an inch, they say 2 inches, and out in Occidental we got 3 in some vineyards. So I had them spray with Serenade the Friday before, just as kind of a catch-all, because that vineyard is very prone to botrytis. And we did have some botrytis out there. I picked on the Wednesday, so after the Tuesday rain. So of course all that spray had been washed off, but at that point it was more of a let's just make me feel better about this situation in case it is as bad as they say it could get. But as far as when the fruit came in, it was absolutely gorgeous. I'm really happy with the quality overall. I mean, I had no major issues with it. I hit it with 40 ppm of SO2 in the press pan and then just put it in tank to settle for 2 days before I barreled it down so that I could get off gross lees if I was, I pulled out maybe 50 pounds of botrytis out of the 5 tons of fruit that I got, so it really wasn't a big issue microbially for me. But yeah, overall, I'm thrilled with the vintage. I just trying to make sure we had tank space was really the biggest concern of this harvest, which is not a bad problem to have. So, yeah.
All right, so it sounds pretty positive from everybody here. Definitely a gift of Mother Nature this year. So what we'd like to do next is sort of walk through the growing season. And first of all, we'd sort of like our panelists, and we can go in any order now, whoever wants to jump in first, to just compare 2018 to 2017 in terms of bud break and fungal pressure. So who would like to start?
Yeah, so for us at Gatch Ground, bud break was about 3 weeks later than the previous two vintages, and bloom tracked about 2 weeks later, and then harvest obviously 2 to 3 weeks. That was pretty really gradual growing season. I don't remember really too many heat spikes throughout the vintage where we were had really elongated, really fast shoot growth. It was pretty smooth. Fungal pressure, we had a pretty average or normal fungicide program, and we didn't see anything out of the ordinary that, mildew or late botrytis or anything that we needed to make an extra application for. So it was, in my sense, it was kind of an average, normal year. So nothing out of the ordinary.
Over at McAvoy, we have had in 2017, the fungal pressure was really high. It was quite a bit for us, so it's hard for me to compare year to year just because I did more intensive sprays this year to make sure that everything was clean. However, just like you were saying about bud break, we had the same pattern much later, but the thing also was it was really uneven, and so our shoots were really uneven, and then bloom was uneven for us too. And that was this year in particular. But the fungal pressure this year was totally moderate, not only because we spray more, but it was also really, really windy at our site. And I think that affected not only our phenology, and kind of the lack of uniformity and everything, but also just really helped out for us because it was really windy and really, really, really foggy. So, but we just did, we're organic, so we have to spray every 7 days anyway. So it was just on a schedule, and so we didn't have any mildew, which is great.
Windy and foggy, that sounds like the Petaluma Gap.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I would say as is typically the case with farming, you look to last year and see, okay, where did we fall short? What went wrong? What was bad? What was good? And one of the main things during the pruning season in 17 was it seemed to always be raining. And so I felt we had to speed things up with pruning, bringing on extra crews from the outside. So the quality of work we did in 17 was hastened, and it probably wasn't to the degree as it was this year. I felt this year, we got through the whole pruning season with it being relatively dry, and then we had what some were calling the miracle March, where it looked like we weren't going to get any rain, and then we saturated the entire soil profile, and we didn't have to start irrigating until I think maybe the first week of June or the second week of June. Just with our nice clay soils, really held the moisture well, and that saved us from using even more water. I would agree with the fungal pressure because also in 17, with how much rain we got all winter, all spring, we didn't spray at all in April because we couldn't get into the field. And so our intervals were stretched. I don't think it went as well. And then also at that same time, we were using certain chemistries that we thought, might have some resistance, but was it really resistance, or was it the fact that we didn't spray for a month? Hard to say, because here in the Gap, our 300 acres of vineyard are all in 5-foot spacing. So with us, the idea is you need to spray over the row. You need to get the planks in there to spray. So we do our best in the winter to keep the weeds low, cover crops low, so that the soil dries out as quickly as possible. And this year we were able to do that. So this year we were able to get in, I want to say our first spray was the second week in April. and it was with the over-the-road machines, and we went from, in the past, we usually will do the first 2 to 3 sprays on a 2-week interval, and then go to 3-week material, trying to buy ourselves as much time in between to get work caught up. But we seem to do a much better job keeping up with work, and we also went with a straight 2-week interval with sprays this year, which made it so we sprayed 10 times throughout the course of the season. Pinot Noir was very clean. Chardonnay, only mildew I saw in Chardonnay was where it looked like machinery maybe hiccuped and you had the sprayer stop for a second and you'd have one vine loaded with mildew, but otherwise it was very clean. So I think part of that was just having just the perfect growing season where we could get in with our equipment and get the sprays on. But the mildew pressure was high. I don't know if you guys all noticed that, but the pressure was high all year long. We also integrated some spore trapping through coastal agricultural consultants, Ryan Ron. We put out some traps, so even though the mildew index was incredibly high in Petaluma most of the season, we weren't catching very many spores in our traps. And so we're going to use that technology again this year in a way to try to figure out how we can spray more effectively, maybe spray a few less times, and time it a little bit better. Because to get through 330 acres on 5-foot spacing with just over-the-road machines takes time. So that was one of our things we learned in the areas of fungicides and fungal pressure. And the other thing I looked at more this year was ontogenic resistance. I don't know if I just heard about this year from someone from Washington State spoke at the Sonoma County VIT Tech Group. And so that was another thing I'm looking at in the future is that, if you spray earlier season, at a certain point, the green tissue, the berries, they won't be infected by mildew. And so our idea at Jackson in the past was always, okay, we got to get to this 3-week material as soon as we can. And I think at times we probably went 3 week too early. And even though we were, top of the line chemicals, full rates, bringing out the big guns, I think our philosophy was a little bit off. So between the spore traps and this idea of the ontogenic resistance, we're going to try to maybe test out a few blocks next year and see, if we can stretch things out a little bit more or how we can save some money in that realm.
Well, there's so much to say. I guess going on with what Scott's saying now, I use a lot of organic sprays, Pure Spray Green most of the time, but when we do get to the point at bloom, we will hit it with a commercial application, and just to prevent, when we know that in the end when you get to harvest and you see that there's like one berry that has botrytis, how the hell did that get in there? So, that happened at bloom, and so if you can hit it at that point, you should be able to protect your fruit a little bit better. You're kind of like proactively treating it. So, and again, like Rhea said, there was a lot of variability, shoot lengths. Initially, so we had bloom, and then it got cold, and then you had heat again, and so some of it bloomed, and then you had to wait, and some other parts bloomed, and so you had this variability that I was talking about before, that eventually the vine looked like it was catching up, but then you'd hit the next stage of maturity, and it would show up all over again. And it was very difficult to catch up. Initially, when I was looking at the vines, it looked like, wow, this is going to be amazing. They're growing like crazy, and wow, look at all the fruit that's on there. And then it started looking like, well, damn, maybe I'm carrying too much fruit, and the vines are looking tired as we get towards the end of harvest. And so, sure, Mother Nature's like throwing you curveballs left and right this year, but quality and volume again were fantastic this year. I'm trying to think of other things that were problems for us. Bees this year were a huge issue. The ground hornets were just out like crazy. I think they were washed out the year before with all the rains we had, but this year they were back in force. And try to put out as many traps as you can because they were all over the place. And when you got to harvest, it starts getting scary when you're harvesting stuff. Again, what Scott said about the machines hitting something, well, I'm the machine and I missed a few. And so yes, you did see some PM here and there, but overall, I'm talking about like we're up at altitude at our vineyards in the Petaluma Gap, and it's usually windy up there, and so we tend to be pretty dry and see the sun early in the morning. We're up above the fog, so we don't have as much powdery mildew pressure up there. So I can be a little bit more careful. A little bit more maybe careless. I can spray more organic stuff and stretch it out a little bit further than maybe somebody who's down in the fog and dealing with that. So it's a little easier.
So Cameron
So our Rogers Creek Vineyard, I believe because it's relatively east, and the elevation is around 300 or 400 feet. As far as mildew pressure was minimal. I had our viticulturist Daniel Roberts just send me our spray report today, and the last time we were in there was July 31st. So, and then we picked on October 15th, or 17th, which is pretty normal. But I will point out that even though we picked in the middle of October this year, last year we picked at the end of September. However, I also remember, I've been working this vineyard since 2004. I do remember picking this vineyard in November 1st, Halloween night. I remember, stressing about, what are the bricks going to be. So definitely there's been a range. Or that would have been back when maybe we would have allowed a little more ripeness. This was, well over a decade ago. So I think one thing that I did notice, this is with Syrah mainly, maybe not with Pinot, but huge clusters, a lot of clumping in the vineyard. So what we had to do is, we normally do a green drop right at just end of aeration, about 80% through. We throw the clusters off, but this year we had a lot of clumping, a lot of clusters touching, and when clusters touch, you get moisture, you get rot. And so we had to go through, not once, twice, but 3 times and drop fruit. And ended up, total was about 50% of the crop we had to drop just because of this clumping problem. So down to, about 1 cluster per shoot. Ended up somewhere around 12 tons total, which comes out to be maybe 2 tons per acre. So the other thing is the seed size. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but in Pinot and Syrah and Chardonnay, the seeds were massive. I have no explanation for that. Maybe these guys down here, but I've never seen such big seeds. So I don't know how that's going to equate, if there's more seed tannin, if there's more, compounds from the phenolics of the seeds. That might be something to think about in the wine down the line. Bud break for us was April 10th this year. Normally it's March, end of March, 3rd week of March or so. So again, about 2-3 weeks behind. So yeah, slow, nice, long growing season, but everything was relatively normal, just delayed by a bit. Yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Yeah, just to kind of reflect also a little bit with what Sam had already said about Gap's Crown, the only other thing that I really noticed with working up there is, now granted that vineyard has, some multiple slopes and plateaus on it as you're going up the side of Sonoma Mountain, but it was really interesting to see how different blocks, because I work with 6 different blocks in that vineyard, which for a small producer is, a decent amount, walking all of these blocks and trying to go through the maze that is that vineyard in some areas. And normally I'm able to call picks, back to back, so I can fill a tank with the 2 clones of Pinot, or, with Chardonnay, it all comes in, so it can all go in the press together. But this year, I picked Gap's Crown over the course, for 4 different lots of Pinot from that vineyard between Trombetta and Furthermore. I was picking it over 12 days, which for me is a little different to go out there and be like, okay, this 828 is 2 weeks behind the 115 up at the top of the vineyard, and 667 is kind of falling in line somewhere in the middle of all that. So just to bring it back to bud break kind of, and also with veraison, everything was just over such a longer period this year, and it was almost, getting the anxiety coming into July and August going, why haven't these clusters turned yet? What is going on out here? And I also had them go through twice and do green drops in certain areas, because there were just some places where even in the same block, 10 vines away, it just wasn't catching up to what was, near the road on Presley and going up towards the hill at the top of the block itself. Just things were so staggered out there. And in a way it was great, because of when it came to the hang time and coming to harvest, we were really able to kind of zone in on each particular spot instead of, freaking out to get it off because we were having a heat spike and it was going to go up to, jump 3 bricks or humidity or whatever it was. But it was just very interesting to see, with this long season, how even in a single site, it was just so different across the board in areas that were even so close to each other. So yeah, that's all I want to add.
Wow, so it sounds like definitely longer, later, a little bit of fungal pressure in 2018, but also in 2017. And so now what we'll do is, by the way, I'm interested in that Syrah, Cameron. One cluster per vine, that sounds fascinating. Anyway, so now that we've sort of talked about the beginning of the season, we'll sort of move into midsummer and questions about irrigation. How much did you have to irrigate? And also labor. Labor has been in the news as something that is an issue, and so we're curious if that impacted you as well. So again, we can start with anybody here at the table.
Yeah, so labor for us is continuing to be an issue. It's something that Jackson family's trying to stay as much ahead of as they can. We're taking part heavily in the H2A program right now. We went from a couple years ago for all of our hand labor using 5 different FLCs from throughout California to last year we're down to 1 FLC. But we're also doing about half our labor on the North Coast with the H2A program. So 1 FLC does half, H2A program is doing the other half. So then that's a program we're looking to expand. It's difficult because you have to provide housing. So the company did have some bunkhouses and housing units available in the Geyserville area, but they're also having to rent hotels in Ukiah, hotels in Santa Rosa. So the cost is pretty substantial, I'm sure. I haven't seen all the numbers. But the nice thing about the H2A program is each year the same workers are able to reapply and return. So you spend all this time up front training people who have never worked with grapes. So it's very difficult at first, teaching them how to prune, sucker, leafing, all the things that we find pretty normal. It's a lot of time up front. But the nice thing is there's a good chance that about 80% of the people you train will come back the next year. Whereas with our FLCs, we were finding just to keep 12, 15 guys in the field, we were seeing a high turnover, people who weren't very interested. It's been very difficult in the FLC world. So the H2A program has groups of people who are hungry to work and they want to do a good job. They want to return, so they're doing the best job that they can. You can, if you want 30 people there for harvest or 30 people there for suckering, they're going to be there. We provide the vans and the transportation, and so it's very reliable. So that is something that the company's looking to do. I don't know where that's going to go, but looking at 2019, we're planning to expand the H2A program a little bit more and continue it with our 1 FLC. On the subject of irrigation, just with the long season, we had to irrigate a lot. In Petaluma, we use soil probes to test for the moisture levels, and so we held off as long as we could, like I was saying before. I think it was maybe around the middle of June, but then from June until October, just to get water down into that Diablo clay soil. We were having to irrigate quite a bit, and with our 5-foot spacing, 5x4 spacing, you're looking at almost 3,000 vines an acre. So it adds up really quickly. So we probably estimated we put close to half an acre foot per acre of vineyard in Petaluma, and whereas with our kind of standard size vineyard in Bloomfield, where it's cooler, sandier soils, we're not having to irrigate as much, we were looking at maybe a quarter of an acre foot per vineyard. So that'd be like 60 gallons versus 25 to 30 gallons. So we use a lot of water, and thankfully in Petaluma we have a contract with the city of Petaluma for recycled water. So we spent a lot of money on water this year as well. But between the recycled water, and then we also do drainage, sheet flow collection. So we have a 100-acre foot reservoir, but March wasn't enough to give us very much water in the reservoir. So we relied heavily on the city of Petaluma, but thankfully we had them because we did have a very long irrigation season. We also grafted some of our Pinot to Chardonnay, so those grafts required a lot more water during the peak of their season. So we'll see how next year goes, but we definitely have to get better. And with the soil types in this area, it's a challenge because you don't want that clay to dry up, because if it dries up, those vines are going to start shutting down, and to get a vine to start, kicking back into gear is very difficult. So we definitely have room that we'll experiment and try to improve and use a little bit less water, but it was a high demand year, I would say.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I think it ties into the labor issue. What practices are you performing mechanically versus by hand labor, such as hedging, weeding, harvesting, specifically for Pinot Noir? Can you repeat?
So the question is, here in the Petaluma Gap, which jobs are we doing mechanically versus by hand? And so here in Petaluma, we're doing as much mechanically as we can right now. So that would be hedging, leafing. So hedging, leafing, harvesting are mainly what we do. So on those 300 acres, most of that's Pinot Noir. It's 100% machine leafed. And so there are a couple blocks that go into higher programs that we handpick, and we'll hand leaf those blocks. But yeah, we had one machine leafer going day and night, and we were able to machine leaf most of that acreage just on a dual shift. So it took about a month, but we were able to do that. And I liked it. I'm not a huge fan or the look of machine leafing, but with a lot of our block orientations in Petaluma, knowing that normally we'll get that heat wave, I don't mind having the dappled sunlight going into the canopy. I felt last year when we had our heat wave over Labor Day, the blocks that were hit the worst were where we hand leafed, and they just seemed to be very negatively affected by the heat wave. So the machine leafing does leave a little bit more junk in the canopy. It's not as pretty, but at the same time will provide a little bit more protection. But that's the idea in Petaluma, is with the narrow spacing, you can't get tractors in there very easily, especially once your fruit begins to size. We can't get anything in there at all other than an over the row, because your track or your tire will actually hit the fruit on the canopy wire. So we're doing as much over the vine as we possibly can. So that's probably 2 hedging passes all done mechanically, 1 leafing pass, and then about 90% of the vineyard is hand harvested. So over at our Bloomfield site, we're trying to do more with mechanization there. I would say we're doing a little bit more machine leafing, machine harvesting blocks this year with Jackson Family. They wanted a list of what could you feasibly machine harvest versus what needed to be hand harvested, either due to safety or the program. And so we machine pick a lot more lots this year that had never been machine harvested before. And I'm still waiting to hear feedback on from the winemakers on, obviously I'm sure they prefer hand-picked fruit, but seeing where all these machine programs go. But we expanded on that. And as far as when we're doing hand work, that even though we had the labor through H2A and the FLC, it's all about how many jobs can you find a way to do two things at once. So it's gone are the days of being able, okay, well, this is our pruning pass, this is our, we've got 6 or 7 hand passes in the season, we just can't afford that anymore, it's just too expensive. We're having, we're paying for travel time. So what used to be a 10-hour day is now a 7.5-hour day from a crew that's coming from Ukiah. So you got to take that into account for your planning. And so anytime that we can do two things at once, whether it's doing a little bit of leafing while we're suckering, to like less obvious things, I don't know. I'm constantly trying to find ways that if a crew's making a pass through here, it's costing us this much money no matter what. So what else can you be doing while you're doing your pass? So I think that's the main thing with hand crews in the future too.
Yeah, so it sounds like it is challenging in terms of cost and labor. What about for the rest of you? Are any of you using mechanical? Anybody else using mechanical? Okay, Rhea?
The past 3 years, we did a research trial for our Pinot vines on mechanical leafing, and we're buying a mechanical leafer this year because if we can reduce at least just one pass in our vineyards, and our winemaker did not find any significant differences in the wine, so I'm really hopeful, and I come from a much larger company before I worked at McAvoy, and we did a lot of mechanization, so I'm trying to implement at least one thing that will still keep our premium winemaking and our higher cost of growing. But like Scott, we clump our passes now. So they're going to come and do shoe positioning. They're going to do something else too. Because we're so far out in Petaluma, our labor issue is just location. They'll say, oh, we're in Napa right now, so we'll come out to you later. And so for me, my labor issue is just patience. So when they say for harvest I need a week advance notice, I have to follow that. And it goes the same for in the years previous. I've been more, I want to pick in 2 days, and they'll say, the 48-hour window, and they'll say, okay, sounds good. But even from the vineyards that we source from Mendocino down to San Benito, they want me to be a lot more patient with the picks because they need to find the right people and find the hauling and all of that. So that's a labor issue for us too. But I'm pretty excited about the mechanical leafing. And we're not doing it on everything, but we'll be doing it in most of our Pinot this year.
Yes?
It just mechanical leafing only on VSP or on split canopy also, and any particular brand of machine that you find is more effective than the other?
Can you repeat the question?
So with mechanical leafing between VSP and divided split canopy, is there any different company or different brand that we think is better? I mean, if I worked at a bigger company, I would probably use the Polancs. But I am working with Garten Tractor, and right now we're going through a negotiation as to which one we're going to get. I rented for the past 2 years different companies, and I like both of them. For me, it's more operator heavy, making sure that your tractor driver is incredibly detailed and careful as to when he does the dips and how he knows how to calibrate the machine.
Yeah. And on VSP only?
That's on VSP for me, yeah.
Yeah, and we were running ours on VSP only. We ran both Clemens units and the Palanque units. I personally like the Clemens units more. I think it does a better job. The Palanque, you leave a little more leaf, but that could be your strategy as well. Like I said, in where we're leafing in Petaluma, I like leaving a bit more behind, and so the Palanque works out really well there. But in Sebastopol, we use the Clemens just because we're leafing on a side that doesn't get very much sunlight, so I'm not as worried about sunburn. So, but if I had to put my own money down, I think I would do a Clemens.
I have a question about the recycled water. Do you have salinity issues with that?
Okay, so the question is about recycled water. Is this specifically for Scott?
Yes.
Okay.
I do have I do have concerns, and we're going to be testing for that this fall, because in 2017 we used far less recycled water, and I was able to start the season with our freshwater reservoir, and then I did the middle season recycled, and then ended with the reservoir just in hopes of leaching out some of those salts. But this year was 90% recycled water, and so we're going to test for that. And with the soil structure in the Petaluma Gap, I'm a little concerned about it. I'm also looking into gypsum silos, or ways of applying more gypsum in the future, rather than having to go manifold by manifold and injecting gypsum. With our irrigators, being able to inject gypsum right at the pump or right at the reservoir, just so that we're constantly trying to push that salt down and out of the root zone. But yeah, that's definitely something I'm concerned about, and we're going to be looking at.
Okay, so
That's a pretty extensive salt.
yeah. We're getting to the point where we're going to open it up to the audience for questions, but I want to make sure that the rest of our panel gets to talk a little bit about, I think some of the rest of you are doing hand harvesting still, so maybe talk about your experience with that and irrigation as well. Evan, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. So again, small grower. Both of our vineyards up on top of the mountain are probably around 21 to 25 degrees. So mechanical harvesting can be really difficult at that. And our vineyard is 5x4, like Scott's talking about at Bloomfield. So let me ask my staff, my workers, how the season went. Evan, how did the season go this year? Oh, it's very difficult. Labor is incredibly expensive now. The prices are just going up and up and up, especially with the fire. Now a lot of them are working in the construction industry or the cannabis industry now, so it's hard for even my guy to go out and find, he's an old KJ guy, and he goes and finds his old KJ friends to come and help, but even they are, as the small vineyard owner, they're only available on the weekends, so it makes it really difficult because they're working at the other jobs during the week, and so it's expensive and difficult to get them. So I find myself doing a lot more of the labor. Last year and this year, I did a ton of picking myself with my business partner and the guys that we could find. So there's a lot of pressure on the small growers right now. I don't know if there's a solution out there yet. The mechanical stuff, I mean, even as it is with my tractor, it's like how I maintain my buns of steel, because I'm going around the corner on the hill and just squeezing and holding tight as much as I can. I don't know what I would do with mechanical harvesters or leafers, or I just can't imagine. I'd seen years ago there was an image of somebody who had attached something onto what are those things called? A snowmobile, right? To be able to get up, and they worked with that. Somehow they created something in France to go up a narrow road on a snowmobile. Or maybe I just go back to horses or something like that. I don't know. It's quite an issue. Water. We used a lot more water this year than we did last year. The vines just seemed like they needed it. I'd probably say 0.5. We do the Syrah vineyard that's up at the top of the mountain has been dry farmed for a long time, and even that vineyard looked like it was needing something this year. But it's dry farmed, so we really didn't have an option to bring up the water to it and keep it going through it. So it took a little bit longer for that to get to finish off, but it ended up finishing off, and it was okay.
Great. Okay, Sam?
Yeah, thank you. All of our vineyards are hand-picked, so we don't work with any machine-picked fruit, but we do use an optical sorter at the winery. We have a Plonk machine that we use, which enables us to, on big days, we can get through 15, 20 tons plus when we need to. So we have that machine. We've had that for the last couple of years now. As far as water goes, we started irrigating same time, Scott, middle of July, and we usually do about a couple gallons a week, maybe 4 gallons a week, all the way up through start of harvest. So we did use a little bit more water than 17. I would say maybe a total of maybe 40 gallons per vine, 35 to 40 gallons per vine. Our vineyard down at Gatron it's been planted for a while. It's pretty established, so we don't have to do really heavy, big irrigations. So yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. Cameron?
Yeah, so this particular site, Rogers Creek, not a whole lot of water unless there's a heat wave or something, phenomenal. But mainly just fertigation, just to get the nutrients in the soil. As far as the labor thing is, I think for the first time this year, I noticed a lot of, Evan, I think you mentioned weekend picks, like, we can't pick until Saturday or Sunday. And I'm like, wow, it was definitely a different scenario in that case. And I think moving forward, I echo the fact that, it's just the construction industry and the cannabis, I don't know how many states were approved last night, but I know Michigan was, and, it's not going anywhere. It's just going to get more and more challenging. I know your cannabis stocks went up 7% today, so call your broker if you're an investor. It's moving forward. I think we're going to have to continue competing with these industries and going to have to figure something out. I'm always relieved to talk to someone from Jackson Family Farms or the Gallows or who have this foresight of mechanization and really have the resources to test new technologies and helping us, the smaller growers and smaller producers, because I think that's where we're going. There's no other way around it. I know there's a lot of vineyards that can't be right now hand-picked, and ours mostly are hand-picked. I mean, unless we do some experimentation, which I will say as a winemaker, we have in the last 3 years we've been playing with the Pellanc in terms of harvesting fruit, and so far results are promising. I think hand-picked Cabernet can definitely is a thing. Pinot Noir might be, maybe not. Maybe I don't know. The jury's still out, but a lot of red fruit. I think if you can get the equipment in, I think the technology is ready to. I think it's getting there. It's really close.
Yeah, also to echo, I do all hand-harvested fruit for all of my Pinot and Chardonnay that I work with, and furthermore, we have stuff coming up from Santa Rita Hills and Santa Lucia Highlands, and thankfully down there we didn't see too much of a labor shortage, but also, just like Rhea said, I try to give them a week's notice, because I have over the last 3 years noticed that while I would love to be able to do the 48-hour window, a lot of them can't get crews set up unless they're clumping picks together. So I try to say, okay, what are your days available? This is the window I would like to pick in. What's going to be the best for you? Because I now have to truck fruit 8 hours north, and I don't want to hit Bay Area traffic and have the fruit sitting on a flatbed in the middle of San Jose for 2.5 hours, And with everything that pertains up to the Gap and Russian River and Sonoma Coast, thankfully Atlas has done a pretty good job with keeping their crews consistent, and they hired a lot more truckers this year, so they were moving as much as they could and as fast as they could, and I've been very grateful to them, because fruit shows up. I was sleeping on the property in the owner's Airstream, so I would wake up at 5:30 in the morning, unload the fruit, put it in the cold room, and then start and getting everything ready before the interns came in. But then on the flip side of it, furthermore, our vineyard manager has his own crew that actually lives on the property. He has a beautiful property out in Occidental, and so he has 12 full-time guys, and then he hires a few more on during harvest. But it's $25 an hour just for each individual guy, plus the supervisor fee and everything else. So if I want something done, I have to make sure, once again to echo, that they're doing 2 or 3 things. And it got to the point that I bought a new-to-me truck before harvest, so I was hauling some of my own fruit in some circumstances, because I was like, I've got a long bed, you can fit 4 bins in there, that's fine, I've got forklift extensions, let's just go for it, because I'm not going to pay X amount of money to have my vineyard manager go out on his flatbed and pick up this fruit, when I'll just do it first thing in the morning, save myself some time and trouble, and I'll I'll just drive as slow as I can around some of those turns in Occidental. But it's one of those things that the labor shortages have, for all of the reasons, everything that we've been hit with over the last year, obviously all the fun stuff that we're dealing with politically and with the fires and with cannabis and all the different industries. It's starting to turn into how much can I have on my plate on top to alleviate any of those issues. And, as a small grower, and as Evan obviously does a lot of his own work and everything else, it starts to get to that point during harvest of all right, well, we're going to have to look to the future and figure this out, because it's just, I want to make sure that all of my stuff is hand harvested, but at the same time, how feasible is that going to be in 5 years? Because I don't know if I'll have a crew. Scott's guys are amazing. Scott Zeller, my vineyard manager, but I can only throw them at so many vineyards during the year, because having 12 guys pick a 4-acre Pinot vineyard when they start at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was waiting on fruit for the middle of the day, and being an outdoor facility for myself, it's I don't want to process at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the direct sunlight. So how do you find that little happy medium, and it's definitely frustrating. And to go back to irrigation, we started, Gap's Crown, very established, didn't have to throw too much water at it. Also with heat spikes not really happening this year, which was amazing. Walking through that vineyard, I wasn't I need to call Drew from Atlas and be hey, throw some water at my blocks. But at the same time, stuff I was seeing in Russian River and Sonoma Coast that do have more, cooler climates and a little more water stress, I was noticing that after the drought and everything in the last few years, and the water and the rains that we got, there were certain vineyards that were showing more, definitely more stress. And, we had to call up Nova Vine and do some replants in some areas for this next year, because, U-Typo was running rampant some places in Occidental, because just those vines were so stressed out after the last few years that we're going to have to throw more water at it earlier next year, but we're also going to have to do a whole just kind of a revamp with the soil. And of course, one of my owners, for furthermore, put all of his electrical running through the vineyard, so we can't even till out there. So it's, just the normal challenges that you deal with, plus added on ones, and just trying to figure out how we're going to make this work and keep the vineyard as healthy as possible. So.
Thank you, Erica. Well, this is fascinating. There's so many different opinions and different solutions, and a lot of innovation that's occurring in the vineyards. So we have 20 minutes before lunch, so in just a second we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. But we have one last, it's a 2-second question. I'm going to ask each member of the panel to give us a number. And this has to do with crop load, because as you know, it was widely reported that crop loads for 2018 were much heavier than previous vintages, up to 30%, some reports. So I'm going to ask each of them to give me a range. It could be, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, whatever, of what your estimate is in terms of crop load this year. And we'll go down the line. So, Evan.
You mean percentage over?
Yeah, percentage over.
I would say we were probably about 15% over.
Yeah, our 3 ranches, we were 18% over.
You know exactly.
Yeah, it really varied by property. With that, some were 5%, others were more like 30%. So it really varied.
Yeah, our Pinot was 40% over, and our Syrah was 25%.
Our vineyard site here it wasn't bad, about 15, but I can tell you I had Chardonnay that was 50% over what we projected in Russian River Valley.
Yeah, overall about 25% over, but I did have a vineyard come in at 110% over. Yeah, that was not a fun day for me. I was expecting, last year I had 9.5 tons, and this year 22.5 showed up on a flatbed, and with one forklift, and an hour later all the fruit was unloaded on the crush pad. And Evan will tell you I sent a freaked out email to him. I called Justin from Rodney Strong, and I was just like, what do? I can't process that much in a day, let alone I don't have space for it. But, overall 30%, and quality was amazing, so I made it happen. But yeah.
Whole cluster next time.
It wouldn't have fit in anything.
Okay, so it sounds like we have a range of 15 to 110%. So Gabe, real quickly, what's the average on this panel?
Oh, gosh.
This is a math genius. Oh, that's okay. We'll give you 5 minutes to 24%. There we go. Okay, let's go ahead and open it up to questions from the audience.
I
Yes.
just had a quick question. So the cool August, it really wasn't hot at all, and that's where I saw my fruit basically swelling. And do you think that was attributed to the overcrop? I mean, it looked pretty normal until that August swell.
I'm going to repeat the question since we're being recorded. So basically, you're saying due to the cool August, did that impact the crop?
And also, did you change your irrigation schedules because of that August?
And did you change your irrigation due to the cool August?
Yeah, so we definitely slowed down irrigation during August. I would say it kind of goes back to when we do our crop estimation, typically what I'll do is I'll jot down the date when we're at 50% bloom, and then I come back, I think it's 60 days or 50 days after that, and do lag phase weights. And the funny thing this year is when we did our lag phase weights, we looked at the numbers and we're like, nah, no way. But now, last week I was reviewing everything, and had I not taken that stance, we would have been pretty close. But it wasn't just that, it was also, there was no, I think just the mild season, there wasn't as much shriveling, because typically in Petaluma, where we machine harvest, I'll automatically knock off 10% off my yields, just because of the rachis, and then also bird damage, shrivel, high bricks for some of our programs. So typically anywhere from 8 to 12% is what I'll use. But had I looked at those lag phase weights and believed myself and actually used, times everything by 2 and stuck by it, probably would have been pretty close. So I think that it was there. It was just, it's true. It looked better and better. I mean, week by week, it was like, wow, this crop keeps getting bigger and bigger. But I don't know. I think next year I'll stand by my numbers a little more.
One more response.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of shatter this year as well. I noticed the fruit at bloom, really good weather conditions. So usually some of our disjunct-clone blocks, gaps will shatter out a little bit, and everything went through really easily without any big issues. So, I mean, it wasn't so much cluster size, but cluster weight, berry counts were high. That attributed to the higher yields this year.
Any questions? Yes, right here.
I have two general questions. When you have the yield, the crop size increase so much, say in this case 110%, what does that do to the quality of the grapes, number one? Number two, generally, what do you do immediately in terms of irrigation right after harvest? Should you give them some nice comfort water and then before you kind of shut it down before the rain comes? Does that do better to the grape, to the vines, right after harvest?
So 2 questions. Number 1 is, with such a large crop load, does that impact quality? And then number 2, how do you handle irrigation right after harvest?
Well, specifically going back to that vineyard that I had come in at 110% of last year, what I saw as far as quality was it was almost better quality this year than it was last year, and just the fruit was amazing. With the longer hang times, I was seeing the stems actually lignify a lot more and have more rounded tannins. The seed tannins were, the seeds were brown. Like, I was seeing seed browning for the first time in cool coastal regions in the last 5 years, and it was amazing because the texture was there, the flavor was there, the acid was there. So quality-wise, it was fabulous. 10 out of 10. I was super happy with it. As far as the vineyard, what we did after we harvested was we actually laid down some fertilizer because we figured that the vines were going to be pretty stressed out after unloading that much crop. So the vineyard management company recommended that we throw down some fertilizer, so we did, and we did a little shot of water, not a lot obviously, since canopy was starting to throw some basil leaves and shut down pretty quickly after we harvested. But we're going to keep on top of it this year with a cover crop and take a look at it really early in the season, and probably throw some more, do some more micronutrient additions and whatnot into the soil, just to make sure that for that specific site, it's sandy loam, and it is right in the fog plain. It's an old dairy ranch actually, so it has a pretty good soil composition and the nutrients hold up, but we just want to make sure that the vines don't stress out and release too much nutrient from the crop load that we got.
Yeah, it's pretty typical to add water and fertilizer, manure, gypsum after harvest. You need to, I think you have the vines store more carbohydrates to get ready for the next season during that time. And what was the other question?
Quality.
I think the vines you have to get to the point where you understand the vine and know what it will tolerate because, each site is different, and just going off of one basic, let's have one shoot per cluster, doesn't work for everything. You might be throwing money, dropping money on the ground because your vines can handle and tolerate a lot more crop load. But what I know you might run into would be maybe watering too much and having the sugars slow down and not getting the flavors or the ripeness that you want to get, or having that delayed to the point where you run into rain. And then you're like, oh, damn, why did we do that? Why didn't we stop watering before? That's my take on it.
I'll just add, there's so many variables in wine quality that this is my 26th harvest, and I've never really seen a significant correlation between yield and wine quality. So, we're making adjustments as we go throughout the year in the vineyard and capitalizing on opportunities that may allow a larger yield, or we're making adjustments on crop load because it's a really cold and wet year, and there's mildew pressure, things like that. So I don't know. The whole question about yield and wine quality, I don't. It's bogus.
And then I would say if you had high yields, hopefully all that fruit was sold, so you might have a little extra money to spend on fertilizer. I would recommend it. We always do that. We apply fertilizer post-harvest for at least the amount of nutrients you lost in what was harvested, so taking into account how many tons per acre, and we try to replace that. I also like to water, give it a nice shot, either in like a 1 week or 2 week span, just to go into dormancy without any stress. But typically, a year like this is tough because our vines still have leaves, they're still active, there's still things going on. Nailing down when that root flush is going to be. So we've kind of been irrigating a little bit, each week since harvest, and we'll continue to do so until all the vines are completely dormant. But I'm a big proponent of post-harvest fertigation where you can.
Other questions?
Yeah, on that, to Scott, when you have that tight spacing, how do you get the fruit out of the vineyard? You can't drive a tractor down the roads for a bin. You have a bin. Do you have a hopper in the machine?
So the question is, how does he get the fruit out of the vineyard with such tight spacing?
Right.
So at that site, we have the plank harvesters that actually carry the fruit on them. And so the operation, it's a 3-man deal. So you have the guy driving the harvester, he leaves the row, he dumps into a tractor driver who's carrying a hydraulic dump gondola. That guy drives back to the yard, dumps the fruit into either a staged group of 2-ton gondolas, 5-ton gondolas, something else, and then one guy in the yard taking notes, typically me, adding, making sure you don't overload the truck. But
if you have a long row, you have to go empty them. You have to not do anything to get to the end of the road or dump sometimes. Isn't that kind of...
Yeah, and you gotta kind of plan that out. And that'll all depend on what the crop load is and how long the rows are. But our guys carry radios, and so they'll either radio in, hey, I need you to be on this side of the block, or they flip on the little a disco ball up top, and that means get around to the other side and go pick up the fruit. So.
Other questions, Gabe?
Yeah, we spoke about the changing labor market, and I have 2 more questions about that. One is, are you seeing any sort of change in the quality of labor? And the other is, we also have a changing regulatory environment around labor. Are you having to deal with that in any substantial way yet? And do you anticipate having to make any changes in the future?
Okay, so a 2-part question. Have you noticed any changes in the quality of labor, and have some of the changing regulations impacted you?
The one thing I noticed this year is that we had to do more training on newer employees or new staff. But I don't know if that just kind of ebbs and flows, you know, with the certain folks kind of graduating to a new industry and we're bringing on new ones. But regulation-wise, nothing is different for us at the moment. Maybe someone else could speak to that. But yeah, I did find that I had to be out there a lot more with the labor crews to make sure that we were getting the premium quality that we wanted. So it was just more work on our end. And talking with the supervisors.
So Gabe, in the past, we've typically budgeted, a 10-hour workday, and next year we're moving into a 9.5-hour workday. So we're having to take that into account, that things are going to take longer because we're not going to be getting as much work done in a standard work week. And then we, on top of that, have to filter in the fact that most of our crews are traveling 2 hours at least to get to where they're working. So we're probably going to be looking at anywhere from a 7 to 7.5 hour workday. So just knowing that you're going to need the crews there that much longer, but it's definitely going to be challenging.
So other questions?
I can add to that just one more. I've noticed a more aging labor force, so maybe yes, less quality there. Also, anecdotally, I'm hearing stories of crews that are there for the first 3 days, and then they've made enough money to pay for their rent and pay for their food, and they're not there for the rest of the week. They don't show up. So these are some other issues that we're running into.
Dan, I think you had a question?
Yeah, so at the end of that cool August that Tom from Klein referenced earlier, I was at an event at the Russian River Valley Wine Growers, and some of them were really freaking out about botrytis pressure in that AVA. James Hall was talking about how botrytis was rampant out there, particularly in Chardonnay. That was his perspective. None of you guys have, referenced botrytis pressure, mildew pressure being that significant here. And why would that be? Is it because of the wind here? Because the Chardonnay clusters were huge and really compact, like you referenced, Cameron? What is your perspective on that?
So the question has to do with botrytis pressure, and there were reports it was much worse in the Russian River. And so how is that different from Petaluma Gap?
So I source from Russian River and Petaluma Gap. Russian River, warmer, more humid this year. Windier in the Petaluma Gap. The wind definitely helped us. It helps us all the time. It just drives the fruit out in case you have any moisture from the fog in the morning. But yeah, I noticed in Russian River there was a lot more pressure. I can't speak to Chardonnay as I only get Pinot from the Russian River, but yeah, there was pressure there, a lot more.
And Dan, we're the same way because we're predominantly Pinot Noir, so we only farm, about 10% of what we do is Chardonnay, and we farm high Duente Chardonnay, so it's not as heavy of a cropping Chardonnay clone as the majority of Russian River. The Darling is clone 4, so that's mainly, there's a lot of clone 4 there. So I think if we farmed more Chardonnay here, we probably would have seen more botrytis, because I think that's and it also goes into the fact that everything was so light the year before. People were leaving more wood. They were pruning to get that heavier crop because the demand for Chardonnay was there, and so everyone got, on top of just a heavier year, people left more wood out there to get even more, so they were sitting on it longer, and the result was botrytis.
Cameron, I'm sure you have an opinion.
Yeah, no, I definitely witnessed. We source fruit from the Martinelli family, the Dutton and Rocchioli, so pretty good. We get some from Kent Ritchie, so we definitely get Chardonnay from all over. And it was the fruit that was more up valley, more warmer regions where I think it had to do with heat and humidity, and then it was the guys that left that had big yields. It was these guys rolling in with an extra truckload of grapes that I noticed there were some issues, and those are the ones that we saw when I walked out in the vineyard. You could see, there's definitely a little too much fruit on there that I probably would have liked. So, maybe we got a little cocky from last year's harvest and wanted to leave a little bit more out. So, anyways, but yeah, I don't know. I didn't think it was a disaster. I think it was just, we just had a little more detritus. And, the beauty of making Chardonnay is that, once you stick it in the press and squeeze it, 3 hours later, it's in the pumice pen. So you really don't have to, you kind of leave most of it behind. So, and then again, the whole cleansing part of making wine, fermentation, things usually just kind of fix themselves normally.
Sounds like we might have some great Chardonnay, that's extra Chardonnay. So we have time for one more question before lunch. Yes, in the back.
So possibly for Rhea, I don't know if you have the same type of clay soils, or if anyone is doing under vine cultivation for weed control versus using Roundup for other sprays, and how that would work on the heavier clays that we see in Petaluma Gap.
So the question has to do with the heavier clays in the Petaluma Gap and cultivation under the crop or other methods.
Right, because McAvoy, we're certified organic, and so we do use an under the vine cultivator. The brand that we use is called Gramagna, and it basically kind of churns under the vine. And like I said before, you do need a good operator for it because there's a lot of variation and you don't want to hit the vine itself. But the issue with the heavy clay soils, which we have in almost all of our sites, is that we have to replace the blades on the cultivator, and those are very expensive. So not only does it take a lot longer to work the vineyard and go block to block and making sure you hit it at the right time every year, and that's not always perfect, and that means then you have to do it again. But it's mostly how the clay just really churns up that machine.
Does anyone else have any other solutions for avoiding weeds around them on their clay?
I'm experimenting with undervine perennial, just hoping to not have to use our Gramagna in every single site. We do have one particular block up on our ridgeline that isn't as heavy of a clay, and I'm kind of hoping I can try that. And I'm experimenting with it, but for me, I have to do it.
Yeah, so for me, it was a horrid year for weeds. I timed it all wrong. At least based on what I've been doing for years past, and we use a burn down, and then the rains came and seeded again, and then it was over. So I don't know. Besides hoeing, a second round of burn down.
Yeah, sorry, can't help out in that realm. We're still using conventional sprays because, like you guys know, in Petaluma, if you let the weeds grow, you won't see a vineyard after a while. It'll just be mare's tail.
All right. Well, I know if you have some more questions, we're all going to be having lunch together in just a few minutes, but I would like to ask you to please thank our fabulous panel and all the great information you shared.